I think that new topographics, in terms of being an educator, is always the hardest to teach to my students. And that's because they're really not sure what to do with the banality of it. Often when we get into discussions, they just look at me and they're like, Kathy, I kind of don't know why you're into this work. It's really boring. And I'm like, no, it's actually really not boring. There's a lot happening. I said, you need to really think about what's happening in the images. And for me, it's really the antithesis of nature photography. You're finally allowing the place of transformation, of indecision, of bad planning to begin to come in as a subject which isn't only political, but it's also radical in relationship to ideas of landscape photography. And that, to me, is anything but banal. Well, Baltz is, in a way, the most formal of them all, and also the truest to the notion of ideas of documentary, because place literally becomes longitude and latitude lines for him. You can actually go back and rediscover completely where Baltz was when he was doing Industrial Park or many other bodies of work. He always repeats the mound. So in the same way that the Bechers might repeat the industrial tower, it's like when you look at Baltz's work, there's just always these mounds that come up out of the landscape. And they're really fascinating when you go through his work over a period of time and you just think about what is his relationship to these piles that he keeps looking at. There's a slow burn with Joe Deal where you look at the composition, you realize the formalism within it, and then within that, as you peel back the layers, there's even more to begin to discover. And I really appreciate that about his work. I made a body of work called The Master Plan when I was in grad school of the building of Valencia as a master plan community. And I had a lot of queer professors going, why aren't you making queer work? And I kept saying, well, the master plan is queer work. You actually have to think of it in a much larger way than one's own self-representation. What is self-representation to a certain extent? I mean, I grew up in the suburbs. This is connected to an identity in relationship to being queer in terms of exclusion. So I was really interested in that kind of idea of place, the place of the body versus the place of the architecture, and that both of those things can be transformed unilaterally to connote, again, a specificity of identity. My love with this medium of photography is its ability to convey history and time. And without that, for me, then it's actually not very interesting as a medium. The fact that I made the mini malls in 1996, when I passed a certain street and I recognized a mini mall, all the shops have changed. And that's very interesting to me, that the city is under complete transformation. In the same way within new topographics, you go back to those locations. They're completely different locations. And without that as a document, you really begin to lose that history of what it is in terms of the complexity of the built environment. The absurdities of the West and its development to try to look like Michigan and Ohio and other places is just so prevalent that you kind of can't help but image it over and over again because it doesn't go away. And I think it's fantastic that LACMA's going back to this work, not only because of the holdings in LACMA's collection, but that there's a long enough period of time now, and there are so many different generations of artists. I would say that I'm probably the second generation from new topographics once removed, on to much younger artists that have completely bounced off this work over the years.